Hello, everyone. We ended up only having one participant in the class, and so I decided to, we just kind of had a conversation one-on-one. I didn't really get into the lesson, but I did not want to leave you all without anything. So I'm just going to do a quick little overview of bonds. It's really short. It was going to be a short class anyways, and so it's really short, so I want to go ahead and go over bonds. So that was today's topic with the stock market game. So let's move in here. So what we're going to do, I was going to do a little housekeeping, see if anybody had any questions or feedback. So please make sure you post any questions that you might have and any feedback about the game. How are things going? Please take some time and I'm going to post something that just says, how's it going? Is it, you kind of lost your mojo, lost your motivation, and that's fine. I understand. We've got a lot going on. And give me any feedback, some things that you'd like to see differently. Again, this was my first time doing the class, and so there's probably going to be a lot of changes when I do this again. This format that they have was based off of a classroom setting, and I was really struggling with trying to transfer it into a virtual homeschool learning environment. And I think I figured out how to do it. But again, it's going to kind of disrupt what I've been doing so far. But you might see some things kind of change going forward. So just the FYI, and then that's why I want to go ahead and get your feedback on it as well to see what things you'd like to see that would be different. Are you in the game? Some of you haven't made any investments. So let's try to go in there and make some investments. We talked about stocks. We've talked about mutual funds. And now we're going to talk about bonds. And mutual funds are made up of stocks and bonds. So we're going to go over that today. And then, so just go ahead and make sure you get in the game. And make sure you're looking at your rankings. I'm not going to pull up the rankings right now. Because it would just kind of disrupt too much and had too much dead air. But I'm going to go ahead and move on from there. Today we're going to do a little bit of review of bonds, and then we'll do a little bit of review of mutual funds. We're going to review mutual funds and then get into bonds. So just a little bit about excuse me, guys, I got a little runny nose, but a little bit about mutual funds. We talked a bit about mutual funds last time, and what mutual funds are basically pools of money to invest in a variety of stocks and bonds. And then we got into what are bonds. We didn't really, I accidentally skipped over bonds. I didn't know I skipped over bonds, and I have to go back now and talk about bonds. But they're basically fixed income, which means that they're that exactly how, when you put the money in, you know exactly how much money you're going to get back, and they're basically like loans or IOUs. And then we the week before then we talked about diversification, which is a strategy that helps to reduce risk, and it combines different types of investments. So you can diversify by the different types of investments, which is a stock, bonds, and mutual fund. You can diversify the companies that you invest in. You can diversify by the types of companies that you invest in, the industries, the sectors. There's different ways that you can diversify your business, your portfolio. And we go into that quite a bit when we go into diversification. So you can review that in the diversification lesson. So let's talk about bonds. And here's a story we're going to talk about here first. And this is a story to help, pretty much, I guess, illustrate what we got going here. So John and Mary are friends. They both get weekly allowances from their parents for helping with chores. Every week, John uses up his entire allowance on to buy a comic books series on his favorite superhero. How about Black Panther? And then Mary puts her allowance in her piggy bank every week. She's a saver. So recently, a limited edition comic book featuring John's favorite superhero became available. It is very popular and sells out quickly. So John wants to buy a copy of the comic book, but he already spent his entire allowance. He asks Mary to loan him $20 to pay for the comic book. Mary is unsure if she should loan the money to John. She and John are friends, and she would love to help him build up his comic book collection. And she's always positive that he will pay her. She's even almost positive that he'd pay her back. she also wants to be a friend that's a helping friend. So the comic book collection that she helps John build might be worth a lot of money someday, but lending him the money means that she would not have it immediately available anymore. So it won't be liquid to her anymore. So she would have to wait until John repaid it before she could use it for herself, right? So Mary needs she needs your advice. Should she loan John the money? You know, what would you do? Would you loan John the money? We'll take a moment for you to contemplate that. Yes, no, maybe. And I'm going to sweeten the deal a little bit. John wants to buy his comic book so badly that he offers to pay Mary 10% in addition to the $20 that he wants to borrow from her. So not only will Mary get her $20 back, but she would get $20 plus 10% of that $20. What's 10% of the $20? $2. So she would not get $20 back. She would get $22 back from her. Now, do you think Mary should loan her the money or should she keep her money? That's the question. So that's what bonds do. Bonds are basically loans. And what she would have done is John would have had to issue the bond to Mary, and knowing that when Mary cashes in the bond, when the bond is over with, when John pays her back, he pays Mary back $20 plus the additional $2. Okay, that's what bonds are. Bonds are loans, and they're very, very, very big loans. So bonds are issued by corporations, governments, and government agencies like your mortgage lenders, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac. And they use those to raise large amounts of money. So again, remember, the stock market is all about raising money. That's what it's all about. So keep that in mind as we go through this. So let's look at the different types of bonds. You have your corporate bonds, and these are just what they are. They're bonds that are issued by corporations. The most common type of corporate bonds are usually backed by general credit, the general credit of the corporation. So they have, they back it, meaning that if they default or they do not pay the bond, then they'll have something that will come back and pay it for them. Asset-backed bonds are backed by specific corporate assets such as property or equipment. So some bonds are backed, meaning that it's collateral. So if for some reason they don't pay the bond, then those assets, whether it be equipment or the property, can get cashed in, and now they can pay back. So what Mary could have done was Mary could say, hey, I'll give you $20, but you have to give me 5 of your most valuable credit. You have to give me 5 of your most valuable comic books as backing or collateral. So that means if for whatever reason he gives her at least $20, if she goes to give those comic books, sell those comic books, she can get her $20 back. So John says, okay, here you go. But something happens and John doesn't pay Mary back. Well, if John doesn't pay Mary back $20 plus the $2, she has those comic books to fall back on, and she can go sell it and get her money that way. So that's kind of what the corporate bond is, and that's what it means by asset-backed bonds. Now let's look at municipal bonds, and sometimes they're called like muni bonds, and that's what you'll find a lot of government. You see roads that are being built and a lot of infrastructure around the city. A lot of times those are municipal bonds. And millions of bonds have been issued by state and local governments. And so basically general obligation bonds are backed by the full faith of the credit of the issuer. So we just trust that the government gonna pay us back, basically. Yeah. And then revenue bonds, and it's backed by the income generated by a particular project being financed. So if there's a toll roads that are being financed with this project, guess what? Toll roads make money. And so that revenue that those toll roads make, that's what's backing the municipal bonds if the government does not pay back. Now let's look at agency bonds. Some government sponsored, but privately owned corporations. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are government sponsored, but they're actually privately owned. And certain federal government agencies like your Ginnie Mae and Tennessee Valley Authority, your TVA, they issue bonds to raise funds either to make loan money available or to pay off new projects. So they're using those. They're kind of like the middleman for the middle agency for different bringing people together. That's what agencies do. Then you have your U.S. Treasury bonds, and I'm sure you all have seen those Treasury bonds, those savings bonds. They're not very popular now. They really don't make a lot of money, but you can buy them for like $2, and then 25 years later they're worth the full $25 face value. But the U.S. Treasury bonds, Treasury notes, and it's an immediate term obligation of the U.S. Treasury having a maturity period of 1 to 10 years. And it pays interest semi-annually. So you got your Treasury bonds, and then you have your Treasury bills, those are short-term obligations of the U.S. Treasury having a maturity period of 1 year or less, and that's sold at a discount from face value. And those Treasury bills are the things I was talking about, those savings bonds. They're short-term, and they have maturity dates. Specific maturity dates, and there's a certain value that's available to you. Buy it at a discount, and the value is there. You get face value at the maturity date. So we kind of talked about interest. I don't know if we mentioned interest rate, but the interest rate of what an interest rate of a bond is how you make money when you buy a bond. So if you buy a bond, and that's meaning that you're allowing a corporation or a government entity to borrow money from you, you make your money back by interest. So when Mary said, I'll give you the $20, but you got to give me 10, when John offered to Mary, I'll pay you 10% interest, then that is the money that she's able to make when she gets the bond or gives the loan to John. So that's what an interest rate is. It is determined by many factors, including the length of time the bond takes to mature, and the quality and the reliability of the issuer, and the risk of early repayment. So basically, again, it's no different than the rest of it. The higher the risk of the bond, the higher your interest rate is going to be. If it's a real stable bond, almost 110% guaranteed that you're going to get your money back, you're going to have a very low interest rate. So there's other different factors that go into it, but for the most part, it's risk related as well. So let's look at how interest rate works. Okay, you are investing $1,000. So let's play with some numbers and figure out how to find the interest rate. So a Treasury bond will pay 3%, which is 0.03 if we convert it. So we move, it's 3% here, and we move the, we move that decimal place over those 2 times, because percentages is moves 2 placeholders over. So it's 0.03 interest a year for 30 years. How much interest will the investor collect each year? How much interest will the investor collect at the end of 30 days? So what do we need to do first? First thing we need to do is the way we're gonna know how to find this is we need to know what dollars are invested. Remember, we're investing $1,000. Then we need to multiply by the interest rate. The interest rate here is 3% or 0.03. And that's going to tell us what the question is. How much will the interest will the investor collect each year? How much interest will they collect on top of the $1,000 investment? How much interest will they collect? So here we go. We've got $1,000, which was what was invested, and we multiply that by the interest rate, 0.03, and what do we have? $30 each year. And then it's over, and then the next question was, how much interest will the investor collect at the end of 30 years? You've got $30 per year times 30 years, and so that's $900 that they'll have at the end of 30 years. So if you invest $1,000 or you issue $1,000 bond and that pays 3%, if they pay you once a year, you'd make $30 a year. And at the end of 30 years, but that's 30 years that you won't have access to that $1,000. Remember that. And for those 30 years, you only make $9,000, not only, but you make $900 to not have access to that $1,000. So basically you put in $1,000, you get out $900 at the end of 30 years because you're only making 3% on it. So let's do another example. If you have a corporate bond and you are investing that same $1,000 and a corporate bond will pay 6%. That's 0.06 interest each year for 2 years. So it's on 2 years that you'll have to lock your money up. How much interest will you collect? So let's take a look at that. We have, again, we're going to do the same thing. The dollars invested, which is $1,000 times the interest rate, which is 6%. Remember, to get the 6% into a decimal, we have to move the decimal place from here over 2 times because 100 gives us 2 decimal places that we need to move over with percentages. So we got dollar invested times the interest rate equals the dollar collected. Okay, so that's what we want to know. How much interest would you collect? So let's take a look at that. We've got $1,000 times 0.06. And so that is $60 each year. All right. So $60 each year. So $60 each year. Now let's take a look at, it says how much will they collect? How much interest, total interest will you collect? So that's $60 times 2 years. That's $120 at the end of 2 years. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So that the question was, how much interest will you collect if you invest $1,000 and you make 6% off of it? Then at the end of each year, you'll make 60, but at the end of 2 years, you will have made $120. So which investment would you most recommend to your team? If you had the option, if you had $1,000, in which you do have $1,000 to invest, and which one would you invest in? Would you invest in the $900 at the end of 30 years or the $120 at the end of 2 years? So you got, it's the one that's $60 each year or the one that's $30 each year? That's the question. So you have to decide. Again, this goes into your ability to be how risk averse you are. It goes into that. So I would definitely take a look at understanding, how long are you willing to have your money locked away. As far as the stock market game is concerned, this is a short-term period. So you want to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck in the short term. So keep that in mind. So that pretty much ends bonds. Bonds is a very, very simple concept. It's just basically loaning money. And you loan your money out to them and you get a fixed amount back. So let's go into a little bit of vocabulary words and then we'll wrap up the lesson. So the first one is default. And default is basically it's failure to pay your principal or your interest when it's due. So that's basically you're not paying your bills. So if a company defaults on their bond, that means that they did not do what they needed to do in order to have the money. They may have misused it or lost the money some kind of way, and then they won't be able to pay your bond. And though what happens if a bond goes into default, if it's backed by something, BACKED, if it's backed by something, then that will, you'll notice that you'll be able to get your money back that way. High yield bonds. High yield bonds, another term for them are junk bonds. And basically they're trying to attract as many investors as they can as quickly as possible. So they give like very, very high outlandish interest rates. So it says here, to attract investors, the issuers of these bonds pay high interest rates than your investment grade bonds. And we're going to talk about those in just a minute. And they have the same maturity. So you'll have something that'll have 5-year maturity. Both of them have a 5-year maturity, but you got one that's paying 6% and another one that's paying 15%. But there's a higher likelihood of default on that one paying 15%. Remember, the higher the risk of losing your money, the higher the risk, the higher the interest rate. The issuer. And the issuer is an entity which issues and is obligated to pay principal and interest on a debt security. So the issuer would be, in the case of John and Mary, John would be the issuer. He's the one that's saying, here is a bond. This tells you that I'm going to pay you $20 at the end of whatever term. They didn't talk about a term. And at that end of that term, I'm going to pay you 10% in addition to the $20 that you borrow from me. So he would be the issuer. Let's look at the interest rate. The interest rate is, and we talked about that pretty much already, that's what you get paid for taking the bond, for giving the bond. When you receive the bond, that's what the compensation that you get. And it's generally expressed in a percentage, which we learned like that. And there also, another word for it is coupon rate. Then you have your investment grade bonds. These are the ones that are more stable, and these are the more mainstream, should I say, interest rates. Investment bonds. So bonds that are sold by a very reliable issuer, and that's usually government bonds are pretty reliable. Very large corporations are pretty reliable, and a government agency is most likely to repay, interest rates. So they're most likely to pay, and they're less likely for you to have to deal with a default because they are very, very, they're stable. Now let's get into your IOU. And when you see that, when people, you say, what is IOU? It's pretty much just what it sounds like, but an OWEU. And it just basically acknowledges the fact that there's a debt there and that I owe you money. Maturity date, I use that word a couple of times, saying that the same maturity date, or maturity date is basically the date when the security is payable. So the date that your maturity date is the date that you get your $20 plus, with the maturity date is the date that Mary gets her $20 plus the $2 back. Everything is payable at that point at the maturity time. If they pay $2, if he's paying $2 each month until he pays it back every month, the maturity date, once each month has passed, and that's the maturity date as well, when everything has been paid. Then we've got our par value. We haven't talked about par value, but that's basically the principal amount of the bond or note due at maturity. So basically, it's also referred to as the face value. So anytime you're dealing with, and we did talk about face value. So if the face value of the bond says that it's worth $500, but you issued the bond for $250. Your bond was issued to you at $250. What happens is, once the maturity date hits, your par value or your face value is $500, because that's what they promised. So basically, you get the bond at a discounted price, and then the face value is the par value is what you make towards that. Is the total amount that you made once it's at maturity. And the last concept that we're going to cover, the last vocabulary word more or less, is prepayment. And we kind of covered that in the definition of how interest rates come about, and the factors that go into the interest rate, which include, the likelihood or the risk of prepayment. What is prepayment? Prepayment. P-R-E, that prefix, means before. So prepayment just simply means that you're paying back, that the issuer is paying back the loan before the maturity date. So it's the unscheduled partial or complete payment of principal amount outstanding on a mortgage or any other debt before it's due. Okay. So the principal, which is the amount of the bond, is payable at maturity, and that's also referred to as the face or the par value. And then you have your trade date. That's the date when the purchase, the sale, or the bond is transacted. So what you have to, I think I put those in together. So anyway, the prepayment is paying it off first. So what happened is you're looking forward to getting that income every year for the next 3 years, or let's even just say 3 years, and they pay it off in the first year. You lose out on that income, and so that's why on that potential interest, and you could have had your money somewhere else where it could get that interest. And so prepayment is not, you don't want things to be prepaid when you're the investment, because you're looking forward to that interest to get paid to you. And then we've got principal here. This is apparently a typo. Oh, excuse me. Let me go back here. I'm not sure what happened to my mouse. So then you've got your prepayment, your principal. And that's the principal of the bond is the face amount of the bond. And that's what's going to be payable at maturity, is the principal amount plus your interest rate. And then the trade date is the date when the purchase or the sale of the bond is transacted. So that's pretty much the trade date. The trade date is the purchase of, that's the day that everything transacted, which we are aware of. So, all right, well, that concludes our bond discussion, and we will see you next week. Thank you for watching.